Good evening. Welcome to the 2024 Naval Submarine League History Seminar. My name's David Rosenberg. I'm your moderator for this evening. I've been the chair of the Naval Submarine League History Seminar for the last 10 years. While not a submariner, I'm a former naval person who's taught strategy at both the Naval and National War College and served as a Navy Reserve Intelligence Officer for over 28 years. And in connection with tonight's seminar, I also spent from 1996 on through my recent retirement from the Institute for Defense Analyses, focused on China and its military challenges. The Naval Submarine League, for those who don't know, is a 501c3 nonprofit organization with over 4,000 individual members and nearly 200 corporate members. Our mission is to support the submarine force and to educate the public about the importance of the undersea to our national defense. During our presentation tonight, all of our attendees must be muted during the webinar. But we are interested in your questions, and so if you have them, if you have questions for the speaker, please submit them using the Q&A button. We expect to have about 20 minutes for the Q&A at the end, and we will sign off at 8:30. So, the topic for tonight is the People's Liberation Army Navy Submarine Force. According to the congressional record, as of August of this year, quote, China's modernization effort has been underway for about 30 years. Since the early to mid-1990s, and has transformed China's Navy into a much more modern and capable force. China's Navy is a formidable military force within China's near seas region, and it is conducting a growing number of operations in the broader waters of the Western Pacific, the Indian Ocean, and the waters around Europe. The Defense Department has stated that the Chinese Navy is, quote, the largest Navy in the world with a battle force of over 370 platforms, including major surface combatants, submarines, ocean-going amphibious ships, mine warfare ships, aircraft carriers, and fleet auxiliaries. CRS further noted that, quote, observers believe China wants its Navy to be capable of acting as part of an anti-access aerial denial force, a force that can deter U.S. intervention in a conflict in China's near seas region over Taiwan or some other issue, or failing that, delay the arrival or reduce the effectiveness of intervening U.S. forces. A major component of the modern PLAN, as it's known, is a formidable submarine force, currently composed of 6 nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, 6 nuclear-powered attack submarines, and 47 modern conventionally powered attack submarines. All the nuclear attack submarines and the conventional attack submarines, many of the conventional attack submarines, are assessed as being armed with not only modern torpedoes, but also long-range, 60 to 300 nautical miles, anti-ship cruise missiles. The history and capabilities of this force and the technology and security significance of the development of this is unfamiliar to many Americans. The PLAN submarine force is thus the subject of our seminar tonight. Our first speaker is Captain Christopher Carlson. Chris is a former Defense Intelligence Agency senior intelligence officer and senior naval systems and warfare analyst. He's a former nuclear submarine officer. And he's also, like me, a retired Navy Reserve Captain, Special Duty Intelligence. He's also a current war game designer and is exceptionally fluent in his understanding, which he will impart to you, about the PLAN submarine force and its historical development. Chris, you're on.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it. All right. When we look at China, it was very late coming into the submarine game. They didn't get their first submarines till 1954-55, and these were World War II based designs. On top of that, China had no existing design experience or production experience, so they had to start from scratch. The problem is at this time the PLAN was not really high on the defense priority list. The Army was, and its emphasis was purely on coastal defense. But we can look at China's development in roughly three phases. The first one, I like to call the crawl, is 40 years long. In it, we see an emphasis on anti-surface warfare, which is based upon its near-coast defense strategy, and most of the submarines have direct lines to World War II German U-boats. The walk phase is about 20 years. Again, hard focus on anti-surface warfare, but we're talking now out to the first island chain as part of the Near Seas Active Defense Strategy. Only in 2013 have they really started shifting to a multi-mission capability, which includes anti-submarine and strike. Now, if we look at the birth of the PLAN submarine force, it's 1954-55. This is part of the June 4th agreement. They get 8 submarines. All of them are Soviet World War II designs. The Type S is a seagoing boat, and the Type M is coastal, which was actually used largely for training. China received 3 kits of the Type 03, which was the 613 Whiskey class. They built them and at the same time shipped off a lot of designers and production managers to get education in the Soviet Union, and they subsequently built 21 of these. These are direct descendants from the German Type 21 U-boat. They then started moving up. They made something a little bigger, but essentially the same kind of platform. It's a little more streamlined. The emphasis here was trying to increase underwater speed, and they built a gazillion of these things. The Romeos, as we call them, was armed with the same weapons and same sensors, but they're just longer range versions of the Whiskies. Then China took the design and basically morphed it entirely into the 035. Again, half again bigger, emphasis on underwater speed. They streamlined it more to reduce drag. There was an emphasis on underwater endurance and in seaworthiness. The first 2 they built, China tried to get cheap and just throw in some 033 electric motors. That did not work. They built 4 more 035A with new engines, or new motors, excuse me, and these came out in 1982. The big one was the 035G. This came out with a European influence sonar suite. As you can see, the passive ranging array panels are the light blue up there, reminiscent of French design. Now, this was supposed to be the end of them, but because the 039 Song had delay problems, 4 more 035Bs were built. These were the last submarines that were based on World War II design philosophy. Now, when we look at the nuclear boats, the first thing to recognize is that these were built entirely without Russian assistance. Russia denied them help at every opportunity. So everything from scratch was built by the Chinese. The first 2 boats, the first one came out in 74, the second in 80. They were mechanical nightmares. They had radiological problems. They were incredibly hard to maintain, and there were severe habitability problems. So they lengthened the design by 8 meters for the last 3. These came out slowly, largely because of the chaos caused by the Cultural Revolution. But they have a slightly more powerful reactor, and they've got more space for shielding, maintainability, and habitability concerns that came up earlier. These boats are loud acoustically. They're like a Type 1 Soviet nuke, and for the era, they're slow. And unfortunately, due to the design for these to be anti-submarine submarines, their torpedo, the Yu-3, took an awful long time to develop. The Jia, the 092, had the same problems. Lots and lots of mechanical difficulties. She's loud, slow, for a long time, no defensive armament. And the operational capability of the JL-1 in every declassified study I could find was considered questionable. And there's no firm indication it ever developed or went on a deterrent patrol. When we look at the walk submarines, it's really the songs that come out and get this thing going. These have far more of a Western influence. And that's because, as one of the designers put it, they were instructed that this was the era to look to the West. So the submarine designs are very reminiscent of things like the French Agosta. While the song is larger, it shares many of the design features to include outward opening shutter doors on their torpedo tubes. These boats use German MTU diesels, but the screw, the propeller in the back, is a 7-bladed, highly skewed Russian design with a vortex dissipator on it. The first one was not very successful. It was loud, and that sail caused some problems. The 039G was built with a full sail, and it was quieter, but it was the G1 that came out, which had anechoic coating for the first time. And that was in that was in 2003. All of these are capable of firing wire-guided torpedoes, and initially the YJ-82 anti-ship cruise missile. Then China had to go back to Russia because 1989 we had Tiananmen Square, and the Western countries imposed an arms embargo. So to get modern equipment, China had to go look back to Russia. And she did. The country did that by buying 2 877 EKM kilos, which introduced China to a lot of modern Russian technology, specifically in quieting, the anechoic coating, and the waycoming torpedo. Oh, then we have another forcing function, the 1995-96 Taiwan Strait Crisis. Soon after that, after the U.S. Navy intervened in Taiwan's behalf, the Chinese recognized we need better capabilities to fend off the Americans. So they bought 2 incomplete Russian Project 636 kilos, which are some of the quietest submarines in the world. The first set was standard. They were incomplete Russian units. The second group were 8 of them modified to fire the SSN-27B Sizzler. This is the 3M54 Club. The funny thing is, no other modifications were done. The sensors in torpedo fire control are just like the 877. But the SSN-27B did prove to be inspiration for the YG-18. Now we get to 2006, and the next set of nuclear attack submarines come out. It's been a long time. The reason for the delay is because in 1978, Deng Xiaoping came out with his 4 modernizations policy, and nuclear-powered submarines was not part of that policy. He was not impressed with the capability of the Han and the Jia as it was demonstrated. So it wouldn't be till 1994 that nuclear-powered submarines actually got back onto the formal budget path, and the first boat was laid down in 1998. These submarines were to focus on the problems of the 091, reliable propulsion plant, higher underwater speed, and quieter. In that regard, the first 2 submarines were a disappointment. They were very loud. They were just marginally quieter than the 091. They were faster, but they did not achieve what was perceived at the time to be a 30-knot speed goal. They did attempt to get there by making some adjustments to the sail of one of the submarines in 2013 to 2015, but that does not seem to have worked. Now we get to where China is now and why they are so dangerous in terms of a submarine force. The 039 A, B, and C. These are bigger than Song, half again bigger. They have a lot of kilo-like look to them, particularly in the bow. But the big improvement here is quieting. These are much quieter, and they are equipped with a Stirling AIP engine. The most recent version is the 039C, which it looks like it was commissioned in 22, maybe early 23. And it has that shaped sail, which academic papers suggest is an attempt to reduce the active target strength of the sail. Most recently, we had the Type 041, the Zhao class. This came out in 25 April at the new Wushang shipyard. It's 7 meters longer than Type 039A or B that it is based on, but it has an extern configuration, and it's 7 meters longer. The most likely explanation is that this houses a low-power microreactor. That's a reactor with a power of less than 15 megawatts. And this is consistent with the diagram and discussion that Rear Admiral Zhao gave in August of 2017. The alternate theory is a vertical launch system, but if you look at the satellite imagery shot, that white section is supposedly the new insert. I don't like where the missile tubes would be then. It's too far aft. Regardless, between 29 May and 12 June, this submarine sank at the pier. It has since been recovered and believed to have been sent back into the construction hall where a lot of repair work will need to be done. On the SSN side, the 093As came out 2015, 2016. They were very different than the earlier two. The sails were even more modified, a bigger fillet, more aggressive rounding, and they're 2.5 meters longer, which means the overall drag was probably reduced enough to achieve 30 knots. They were also equipped with a towed array stern tube, very similar to the way the Russians do it. The bumps, varied in shape and size after the sail, are where the towed array handling equipment is stored. While these probably use sound mounts that was harvested from the 636 kilo, they're still relatively noisy. Case in point, version 2 was the one that was tracked by the Japanese in 2018. The last version, version 3, this is the final hull design. You'll notice the towed array area is more streamlined. It is, given its time frame, it probably has the reversed engineered APRKU sound mount, which is the large, very advanced Russian mount, which gets this boat down to a Victor III-like level, making this the first quiet PLAN submarine. Recently, we've been watching another version, the 093B, come out. Depending on how you look at it, the first one rolled out in 2022 or mid-January 2023. It's a question of whether or not the first one was maintenance of an earlier unit or not. These are just slightly longer, and they probably have a pump jet propulsor, which combined with better precision manufacturing makes this boat even quieter. The 094, well, it spans the same range the 093s. The first two are really walk submarines, noisy, do not have the modified sail. The second two are still probably on the noisy side, but they have the sail drag modifications, and the last two are probably quiet. While originally designed to have the JL2 SLBM, they have been being backfitted. If the process is not yet done, it will be soon, with the JL3 with a 10,000 plus kilometer range. Now, when we look at their combat equipment, it does span a wide variety. The MG-10 Phoenix is the basis for most of their first generation sonars. It's very similar to our BQR2. In fact, it's darn near identical. And the SQZ3 is the Han equivalent. It's just bigger. These are all medium frequency, passive broadband. Nothing really to write home about. When we get to the walk phase, you start seeing more emphasis by European designs, particularly France. Why France? Well, in the early 80s, all the European countries were selling to China, but China had access to the Pakistani Agostas. So they got to see not something on the show floor, they actually got to see a deployed submarine. So the majority of people think that the walk phase, if you will, is a Chinese version of the Eladon sonar to include the DUUX-5 passive ranging array, which France sold 2 complete sets to China in 1983. Now, Russia also came in at that same time frame. Their electronics aren't as good, but the thing I want to point out to you is the MGK 400 Rubicon passive array is huge for a diesel boat. That's 4.5 meters in diameter. That is almost the size of a BQQ-5 sphere. Then we later saw the inclusion of towed arrays and flank arrays. The towed arrays look very much like the Russian influence, which means we're looking at 40 millimeters in diameter and up to 350 meters in total length. We also see reconfigurable advanced electronic displays. The only thing I would bring out here is that I have never seen more than 2 operators on any video I've watched, which suggests that the Chinese are relying on automatic detection algorithms, not human operators, to detect targets. Torpedoes. The big thing about China is their initial torpedo set were all World War II. In fact, the YU-1 is a copy of the 5339. The YU-4 is a copy of the anti-ship SAE-T50. And then the YU-3 was supposed to be the first ASW torpedo based on the Set 53. Problem is, it took a long time to develop that thing, and it didn't go into trials till 1988. These are relatively crude, think Mark 37 early mods. In the walk phase, we see a big jump. The YU-6 really is a Mark 48 derivative, except that the engine was made by Russia. It is Article 211TT1 and is capable of moving the torpedo at 50 knots. On the electric side, you have the YU-9. This is the most advanced YU-3 design, which has wire guidance and wake homing. But what they did is they swapped out the silver zinc battery with silver aluminum, which gives this torpedo a 42 knot capability. On the run side, we're looking at torpedoes that look an awful lot like what's in Western navies. The YU-10, which I don't show here, is the YU-6, but they add hydroxyl ammonium perchlorate, or HAP, to the autofuel. This gives them Mark 48 ADCAP propulsion performance with a speed of around 60 knots. We also know that there's an upgraded seeker system and that they've got wire guidance that uses fiber optics. The YU-12 is an electric torpedo that's very reminiscent of the German Seehawk or the Italian Black Shark. Again, you're looking at a silver aluminum battery, and you're looking at a propeller and configuration that suggests a quiet torpedo. When we get to missiles, the first one was the YG-8. This is the one that they put on their surface ships. They put it on the 033G. This was a Romeo that would have to surface to fire. Not very practical. They then took the same missile, chopped off the booster, and then put it into a launch canister that is very reminiscent of submarine-launched Harpoon. And that was then deployed on the Mings, some of the Mings, and the Songs. Lately, the YJ-18 has come to play. This is a copy of the SSN-27, but not an exact copy because it's 1.1 meters shorter. It's designed to fit in a 7-meter launch canister in comparison to the 8.22 meters of the SSN-27. So your 039 series, your 093 can launch the YG-18 out of the torpedo tubes, but they're looking at doing vertical launch and have since installed the vertical launch cells on the 032 King class in 2019 to 2020. So even though China came late to the game and it was slowing developing things, they were working to get their indigenous design and production capability up to speed. Yeah, up to 2004, World War II dominated their thinking, largely because of the coastal defense strategy they had to execute. After 2012, we start seeing more emphasis on multi-purpose, and that it is based on not only a very highly organized harvesting technique, but their own R&D aspects. This means that the latest Chinese submarines are quiet, multi-mission platforms, showing us that China has worked itself up to a full sprint.
Chris, thank you very much. That was both an excellent and comprehensive presentation. And I am truly impressed because you did get it into 20 minutes. So I am truly grateful for that as well. Our next speaker is Professor Andrew Erickson. He's a professor of strategy in and the core founding member of the U.S. Naval War College's China Maritime Studies Institute, or CMSI. Which, for those who are not aware of it, is if you go to the Naval War College website, go to their publications, and look up the CMSI publications, these are among the most authoritative unclassified works that you can find anywhere. In addition, Andrew is a visiting scholar in residence at Harvard University's John King Fairbanks Center for Chinese Studies, and he is the author or co-author of 7 books and monographs, editor, co-editor, or contributor to 14 more. And I should also note that it can be recently noted he is the recipient of the Navy Superior Civilian Service Medal. Professor Erickson will be talking about the implications of the submarine forces development in both naval history and for the U.S. Navy. Andrew, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Rosenberg. It's a great honor to be with you here tonight and with the rest of the Navy Submarine League participants. Truly, in this time of increasingly thin margins and great urgency and grave stakes, the submarine force is the greatest margin of excellence that we have. So I think this all could not be more important. I'm grateful that you mentioned the China Maritime Studies Institute. To make it easy, anyone interested in our publication should go to www.usnwc.edu/CMSI, and I'll be happy to share this and other links subsequently if that's helpful. Chris gave what I think is an excellent tour de force of China's submarine hardware development. And I concur with his assessment that this is now a sprint. And as Dr. Rosenberg asked me to address, I want to concisely summarize what I think where this sprint is designed to be heading towards. In the big picture, I think it's relatively simple. Xi Jinping is the most ambitious and capable PRC leader in many ways since Chairman Mao. And he wants a legacy that in critical respects is in the same league as Mao. And with the slowing of China's economic growth and other issues, the only way to get that, the only achievement that would be big enough to put him in the history books in that context would be to achieve the Chinese Communist Party's long-held goal of achieving some degree of control over Taiwan, which and thereby, among other things, fully conclude the Chinese Civil War unambiguously on the Chinese Communist Party's terms. Now, as part of the effort to get there, what we're seeing is what I would describe as an across the board, across the waterfront, if you will, military development approach. China started out by prioritizing critical areas, but now with what's undisputably the world's second largest economy and second largest defense budget by any measure, China is pursuing multiple military mega projects at once. It's prioritizing both quality and quantity. Observing this and analyzing this has been a humbling experience at CMSI. I helped set up our institute in its earliest stages in 2004 after I arrived in Newport. We were established internally at the college on 1 October 2004. In 2005, we held our first conference on China's submarine force. On 1 October 2006, we were officially established U.S. Navy wide through the POM process, through a CNO decision. We then came full circle in 2023 with our conference on Chinese undersea warfare. I've shared this link with the presenters, and I'm happy to share it with the group. For every conference, we produce a quick look report, a 2 to 3 page bulletized summary shortly after the conference. And it was sobering to reflect on how much progress China had made in nearly 2 decades. Definitely the sprint that Chris is talking about. And I should note that I won't repeat our findings on hardware because many of those came from the great work and participation of Chris himself, and many other great insights would have been in this report from Dan Packer, who made a signal contribution to the conference. But since this report that I can share with you is unclassified, and Dan Packer's presentation is not, those eligible to do so should seek his insights as appropriate. Let me round out this explanation of connections to CMSI by previewing that on May 14th and 15th of next year, we will be having our next biennial every 2-year CMSI conference at the Naval War College in Newport. And anyone interested in attending as a self-funded participant, please feel free to get in touch with me, and I can help you get connected with that. We would love to have folks join us. Since Chris covered the hardware side so well, and I believe that the big picture strategic intentions are fairly clear, and I would only add to that they're pegged to a near-term timeline, not an exact countdown plan by any means, but I really want to underscore what's not just a year number of 2027 that you probably see in media reports, US government official mentions. What really needs to be emphasized is that 2027 is a signature top-level national prioritized policy of Xi Jinping himself. And it's properly called the Centennial Military Building Goal of 2027. And it's a waypoint to future military modernization that boils down to an important part, giving Xi Jinping a full toolkit of capabilities to use to threaten Taiwan credibly with military force in the form of a variety of potential campaigns, or, if necessary, to actually be able to use military force against Taiwan and any who would come to its aid, first and foremost, the US. So that's really what we're up against. Now let me share a few of our research findings that shows really what China is still up against and working through and making progress on through great effort, but more slowly and with greater challenges than with the hardware that Chris has rightly surveyed and emphasized. So when it comes to personnel and organization, um, we assess at CMSI through our open source Chinese language research that uneven quality and chain of command inefficiencies are problems for China right now and likely represent enduring uh, challenges. They're certainly working a lot harder at developing and training the force. Xi Jinping himself has prioritized this. It's getting plenty of attention. They've done a huge effort, including reshuffling submarines among fleets. Um, but if you remember nothing else from this presentation, um, I hope you will remember this concrete example of what they're up against in a personnel sense. Um, in parts of American society, there are debates about what standardized tests measure and how much they should count, and are they even what have you. We all know what that's about. People have very different views. But in China, education and professional society and one's track in life is very much shaped by this, and society is very much built around it. So it's not a point of debate, it is a shaping function. So that's why it's significant. When we look at how China's submarine officers are recruited, China takes in roughly 200 annually. About 60 come from high-performing former enlisted personnel, but of the roughly 140 high school students recruited, there is a great disparity in exam scores, national exam scores. Roughly 40 go through the PLA Navy Engineering University, which averages the second highest national exam score intake of all the roughly 18 PRC PME institutions. But those folks are technical officers who go into dead-end engineering tracks, and if they wish to stay in the submarine force, typically have to do a career change to become political commissars. It is a very bizarre design in that system. The roughly 100 high school recruits who go to the PLA Navy Submarine Academy average the lowest national exam scores of all 18 PLA PME institutions. China's not stupid. It realizes that this is the issue, that this is an issue. The reason they seem unable to solve it is because of recruitment limitations that stem from the undesirable conditions aboard PLA Navy submarines and the perceived non-transferability of skills upon discharge or retirement. China's working very hard to make submarine conditions less worse than they were before. They're already significantly less worse, but they're still quite difficult, even in the by the standards of the unforgiving world of submarining. It's highly problematic that the technical experts tend to have to shift to become political commissars if they want to stay in the subforce. These are not the cartoonish folks from Hunt for the Red October. It's now more of a combination of atheist chaplain. I know that's a contradiction. Career advisor, morale booster, personnel manager, but despite the fact that it's become a more pragmatic position, the career incentives don't seem to align well, and we think a lot of those folks are phoning it in to some degree. Let me wrap up our summary of findings from the conference by focusing on the chain of command issues that we've identified. PLA Navy submarines, at least until recently, have often deployed with personnel senior to the commanding officer because the system is concerned that um, they need fleet leadership in order to supervise tests of new weapon systems or new patrols or other sensitive issues. However, obviously that subverts the chain of command and has pernicious aspects, and we believe that accidents have been correlated with precisely such a process. We've seen in the internal literature how it's recognized that this is a problem, but at least until recently, they still hadn't weaned themselves themselves off it. So one implication we believe that stems from potential chain of command issues and definite talent lag issues is that um, we believe, based on how their system works, for relatively straightforward operations where they can plan ahead and train systematically, say, go to X sea area and sanitize this kind of kill box or whatever. We think they're getting pretty good at that sort of thing. But we think that unexpected situations requiring quick decision making are probably an unusually strong, problematic Achilles heel for them. And we believe that innovative ConOps on our part can continue to stress them there and continue to buy us, maintain an additional margin of excellence for us there. So I will stop there and look forward to others' insights and the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And I expect there are certainly questions already on all of this. Our next speaker is Dr. Jonathan D.T. Ward. Jonathan is the founder and president of the Atlas Organization, a strategic advisor group on U.S.-China global competition for business and government, and the author of The Decisive Decade, American Grand Strategy for Triumph over China, and China's Vision of Victory, a guide to the Chinese government's global view of global grand strategy. Dr. Ward will discuss the geostrategic implications, in addition to what Dr. Erickson has done, of China's submarine force. Jonathan.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, and great to be here. I'm a fan of the Naval Submarine League. It's been wonderful to brief everybody over the years, and I'm going to return to some themes you've already heard me speak about for those that know my work, but to reinforce some of the geopolitical history here. As Andrew pointed out, Xi Jinping is probably the most ambitious leader that China's had since Mao, and it makes sense, I think, in a sense, to return to some of Mao's original visions here to help us understand where we are today. And then what I want to get into is the industrial core of China's general grand strategy. And there's a series of strategies that we all know well, whether the Belt and Road Initiative or dual circulation or military modernization. But this is all powered essentially by economic industrial strategy, the financial architecture that allows them to do that, and then the strategic corporations of the People's Republic of China that exist across every significant industry. And, shipbuilding in general is one of the best possible examples we could have of how that all comes together to create what I think we're seeing as our first panelist explained, China is now in a sprint in the submarine domain. So how do they reach a sprint? I mean, they're going to reach a sprint. They already have across a variety of industries. And I want to talk a little bit about how that happens in very broad terms. So I want to start with a quote from Mao Zedong that I used in China's Vision of Victory, where he says, all of the people in each West Pacific country don't understand why and with what reason the Americans from so far away come to the West Pacific countries using their military, political, economic, and cultural power to control these countries. It has no basis in reason. Therefore, one day, sooner or later, America will certainly let go of the West Pacific places and withdraw back home. just like it has had to let go of other regions of the world. Then he says, if the Americans don't go themselves, there will be a day when the people of each country unite and throw them out. So I think that's where we are today. I mean, you have Xi, who's an heir to this vision. He's an heir to the time frame set by prior leaders, the two centenaries in 2021 and ultimately 2049, taking China along this path of ascendancy in the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, which was originally Mao's concept of the new China and has then transformed under Xi Jinping into a vision of Chinese power and really the use of military power to consummate, in a sense, many of the original ideas of the founders. And as Xi Jinping says in his own time as the great helmsman, so to speak, he says, backed by an invincible force of 1.3 billion people, we have an infinitely vast stage for our era. And he talks regularly, as we know on this call, about being able to fight and win wars, the need to build a strong people's military more than at any other time in history. And as Andrew was describing, most likely to use this. I think they've been absolutely clear about that, and they've built the military infrastructure accordingly. But most importantly, I think, because this is how, in my view, we win or lose in the free world, the long-term contest with China and those who are on its side fundamentally. They've built the economic power to sustain all of this, and that was really largely through the period of economic engagement in the West. So I want to get in a bit to some of the core strategies, the mentioning and sort of use of subsea and deep sea in some of the big strategic documents, and what that means, how that sort of fits together in the general sort of strategic picture. So we can see Xi Jinping, as usual in his party Congress speech, he talks about the importance of deep sea, among other, as the party sees it, cutting edge, sort of strategically important industries and sectors. He says, we have grown stronger in basic research and original innovation, made breakthroughs in some core technologies and key fields, and boosted emerging strategic industries. We have witnessed major successes on multiple fronts, including manned spaceflight, lunar and Martian exploration, deep sea, and deep earth probes, supercomputers, satellite navigation, quantum information, nuclear power technology, airline manufacturing, and biotechnology. So, he groups this with the sectors that are really at the core of Chinese economic strategy. If we go back to Made in China 2025, which was really the premier industrial strategy of the People's Republic of China, and I think it's still the guiding strategy, you find that the same industries are present in the 5-year plans, including the most recent one, but where they put new energy vehicles. I mean, we all know the story of China's explosion onto global markets with electric vehicles that's taken place in the last few years. Next generation ICT, that's companies like Huawei, which dominate all sorts of international markets, biotechnology, new materials, aerospace. I mean, I think we'll see the story of Boeing versus Comac play out in the next 5 to 10 years. Then ocean engineering, high-tech ships, robotics, which also matters to subsea power equipment and more. So, you can see that this is at the center. I mean, maritime power, but also its implications for deep sea and subsea in general are in the primary overarching strategy documents. And then in the 5-year plan, which I still think are among the best possible guides to how the party really looks at the bigger picture in terms of economic strategy. In 2021, in the most recent 14th 5-year plan, the State Council says that overall economic operations were stable and the optimization of the economic structure continued, with GDP exceeding 100 trillion yuan, which is about $20 trillion. They're roughly in that zone now. The construction of an innovation-oriented country has yielded fruitful results, with a number of major scientific and technological achievements in the fields of manned spaceflight, lunar exploration projects, deep sea projects, supercomputing, and quantum information. Again, so they tend to group this with space, which is sort of interesting. I mean, you see that come again and again, two frontier areas as the party sees it. And then they say, essentially, as a directive, we will, in this period, make forward-looking plans for the future of industry in the fields of brain-inspired intelligence, quantum information, genetic technology, future networks, deep sea and aerospace development, and other cutting-edge technologies and industrial transformations. Then we will organize and implement future industry incubation and acceleration plans and plan the layout of a number of future industries. So then we get into what I think is the most important piece of this, which is how does China actually do this? They essentially execute their entire grand strategy, their economic strategy, their military strategy to a certain degree, through the use of strategic corporations. And in the premier body that describes these corporations, which is the China State-Owned Asset Supervision and Administration Commission, known as SASAC, SASAC. This is the big core of Chinese state-owned enterprises, essentially the core state-owned enterprises, what they call it, the central companies. This has companies that are in aerospace and defense, automotive, chemicals, construction and engineering, energy, industrials, mining and resources, railway, shipping and shipbuilding, steel and aluminum, technology and telecommunications. So these central SOEs, state-owned enterprises, brought in 4.75 trillion US dollars in 2022, and their total assets were 33.75 trillion US dollars in that year. So this is a very large chunk of the general picture in China. And of course, among these are their premier major shipbuilding companies. And China has gone through, in recent years, a series of mega mergers, creating some of the largest companies in the world. And most recently in 2019, the merger was approved and then executed between China's Shipbuilding Industry Corporation and China's State Shipbuilding Corporation, both of which are SASAC corporations, and they're now one. It is the world's largest shipbuilding company, I believe, and IISS estimates it having 20% of global market share. And that's in addition to other Chinese shipbuilders and shipyards. So I'm actually going to quote now a paper from the Naval War College, so another endorsement of the China Maritime Studies Institute, which does really the best work in the world on this sort of thing. And there's an excellent paper by Sarah Kirschberger there, released last year, where she says that one further general characteristic of Chinese military shipbuilding is a high level of military and commercial shipbuilding integration in all yards. That is unusual, as the industrial base, skill sets, and materials required for warship construction are quite distinct from commercial standards. And then the difference is even more pronounced in submarine construction. So this is a sector in which it's a very pure form of civil-military fusion. And that's one of the parties, as I think everybody here is very familiar with, one of the party's core initiatives to convert civilian innovation and general economic power into military innovation and military power. And here the state shipbuilding corporations are a pretty powerful expression of that, but there are other companies as well that contribute to China's maritime dominance. So China COSCO Shipping Corporation Limited, which is the one of the largest merchant and general shipping fleets in the world, is on there. And by the way, as of this morning, that is still purchasable on through American stock exchanges. So we have not yet gone through the process of taking the steps we probably will need to do on the economic side. But bottom line, these companies, this is how they execute this. This is why, in my view, China is able to operate at such speed. I mean, on one hand, they identify the sectors in a long-term way that they seek to dominate or to become, as they put it, world leader in, second to none, all the rest of it. But then what they do is they have this sort of cross-industrial and cross-corporate system in which they're drawing upon the work of all these different sectors. They're also drawing on a very sophisticated global, pursuit of intellectual property by licit and often very illicit means. So a great deal of intellectual property theft, and that all comes together in the China market to produce world-leading companies and to send them out into global markets and to innovate, to capture market share, and ultimately to contribute and really underpin, if not define completely, the power of the People's Republic of China. And all of that means, at the end of the day, we have this opportunity in strategic competition to sort of de-link from what China's core economic strategies really are. I mean, they are driven and they still rely upon access to Western markets, capital, and technology, and that's something that we have control over. So, insofar as we're forming a counter strategy, getting into the sort of unplugging of these key strategic industries the containment of these key strategic corporations, I mean, that could yield massive potential for a U.S. Counterpoint. But going back into one of the 5-year plans, I just want to touch on one more here. It's in there in a section called Strengthen Original and Leading Science and Technology Research, and they put deep space, deep earth, and deep sea all together with polar exploration, and it's one of the 7 categories. So again, they're sort of looking at it as a, this is the sort of general civilian and certainly military combination in this field, but their general view of deep sea is as a frontier area, frontier technology, and they've brought other technology corporations in there as well, such as China Electronics Technology Group Corporation, which is helping them build a massive sort of undersea sensor capability that also is clearly relevant to both military and economic competition. But in this piece, they say, deep space, deep earth, deep sea, and polar exploration, we will perform basic scientific research on the origin and evolution of the universe, carry out interstellar exploration such as Mars orbiting, where is this? Develop a new generation of heavy lift launch vehicles, deep earth exploration equipment, deep sea operations and maintenance, and equipment test ships, et cetera, et cetera. So they tend to group this in their strategic planning at the highest level into some of the broader frontier categories, but then they execute this with strategic companies that are involved in quite a wide array of military and civil operations. And of course, we've become much more attuned to this in recent years. China State Shipbuilding Corporation, for example, is on the Pentagon's list of Chinese military corporations. So, I think the U.S. understanding of this is increasing massively. And a good sort of comparative category here, I think, is space itself, where you have companies like China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation and China Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation that, lead the general enterprise of technology development, innovation, and, engagement with the Chinese state as corporate producing entities. So, bottom line, we have that bigger picture to deal with. I mean, the suite of strategies that really define the Communist Party's long-term vision, which includes, of course, things like the Belt and Road, which seeks to tie the general global economy into a market that, with China at the center through infrastructure, investment, trade, and technology. Increasingly, the military modernization, which seeks to take them from from the crawl to the walk to the run to the sprint, as we've heard this evening, and across every real avenue of military activity. And then, more classic strategies like Made in China 2025, which the party has downplayed, but which still are at the core of their general industrial approach. But I think what we have to work with in counter strategy is really seeing through all of this towards the strategic corporations and the fact that they still exist to a certain extent as business entities, mostly doing business with the party, but often with much of the world, and that gives us significant leverage. So thank you. I'll stop there and appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jonathan. You have put a lot into that, both in terms of preparation and in trying to get all this out. So I greatly appreciate it, and I thank you for that. One quick interjection before I introduce Dan, and that is that for those who have asked questions, a number of your questions have already been answered on the Q&A button, if you go check into that. But I will also try to, in the time we have available, ask some of those. Okay, our final presenter tonight is Captain Dan Packer, U.S. Navy retired. He's the director for AUKUS, AUKUS, on the staff of Commander U.S. Submarine Force. Captain Packer is a career submariner. He's commanded USS Seawolf at SSN-21 and was director of the Mathematics and Sciences Department at the U.S. Naval Academy as well, a lovely place where I taught in 2015, 2016. He will discuss U.S. and Allied submarine readiness in connection with the PLA and submarine force. And Dan, over to you.
Thank you, sir. I'm very humbled to be a panelist along with this august team here, and I'll try to do it justice. My talk is going to be from a different angle. As we look at the Chinese, I'm going to talk about how that is reflected in our allies' behaviors, and most notably under the AUKUS banner. there is no doubt that our allies understand the revanchist resurgence of China as a world power. It has created an atmosphere of urgency where the whole basis of things have changed, and this is no more apparent than in Australia. So Australia has been with us through thick or thin for many years. You can go down and walk in downtown Sydney, and you can see a war memorial of all the wars that Australia has fought. They're the same wars that we have fought. I even joke with my Australian counterparts that sometimes they've been in wars that with us when they probably ought not have been. And so there has not been a country since the fall of Singapore in December 1941 that has been with us. But they've never been with us like they are today. Australia is investing in defense like nobody's business. They're going to grow under the AUKUS initiative, their submarine force, from 6 Collins class to at least 8 nuclear-powered submarines, to grow their submarine force from 800 to 3,000 officers and sailors. That's an unprecedented set of growth. And you could say, hey, Dan, is that real? Well, I will tell you, it's real. It's real today. We have 3 Australian officers on board U.S. submarines, with 3 more reporting this month. We have over 100 Australians in the pipeline today, and at peak, we're going to have over 450 Australians and 25 U.S. SSNs to help them train up to man their submarine force. For a country of 28 million people, that is unprecedented and awe-inspiring. And so they truly get it. And that's just from a Pillar 1 perspective of getting a conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarine to Australia. From a Pillar 2 perspective and advanced capability, they are investing in cyber, quantum, electronic warfare, artificial intelligence. My team, we lead a collaboration with them in undersea warfare technologies, where we're looking at medium UUV torpedo tube launch and recovery. We're looking at artificial intelligence. We've been able to fly artificial intelligence on Australian and UK P8s, just like US P8s. And so there's an unprecedented set of urgency to build capability to answer the Chinese onslaught. And that's just what Australia is doing. And it goes beyond that, goes to the UK. So the UK, they view themselves as the global Britain. And so with their rather smaller size fleet, they are committed to, along with the US and Submarine Rotational Force West, to have a rotational boat, an SSN Astute class, based out of HMAS Sterling to deter China. And this is a significant initiative for them. They have not done this in decades. And so this is a completely different kind of level of effort than we have ever seen before. The UK is also training the Australians. They have 3 Australians within their submarine force already deployed, and more coming in. So this, under the AUKUS initiative, things are being done that have never been done. We have Australians in Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard. We have Australians in Barrow in the UK to build up our industrial capacity. We are looking at putting our torpedo enterprises on the same footing between the UK and Australia, so across the field. Currently, I'm in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, doing a workshop on how we bring the submarine radio room to the UK and to Australia, so that we can all do tactical control amongst the nations. We have often talked about interchangeability and interoperability, but we've actually never really done it until we have the right common equipment. So this is a different time and a different place. And it's not limited to Australia and the United Kingdom. France looks at themselves as a Pacific power, and they have just built their newest submarine, the Suffren, and the Suffren is built to come and fight in the Indo-Pacific. They have deployed their old Rubies classes to the Indo-Pacific and have a drumbeat of deployments that they plan to do year by year to expand their capability into the Indo-Pacific along with the US. Canada had a deployment of the Chicoutimi in 2019, and they are seeking a air independent propulsion SSK that will be able to deploy in the Indo-Pacific to reach out under the ice and into the Indo-Pacific to meet and defend Canada's forefront. So all told, there are nations around the world who recognize the threat of China. They are changing everything that they are doing. They are partnering with the US in a way that has never been done before. And it is an exciting time, but it is a threatening time. And there is much work to do. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I'll turn it over for questions.
Thank you, Dan. And in particular, it looks like you're doing this from your car, probably in a parking lot outside Subpac. So,
That is true.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a great pink building. Anyway, what I'd like to do is now we have a number of questions. I'm gonna take one moderator's prerogative here. I wanted to ask just a question that can either go to Andrew or to Chris or possibly to Dan, and that is the role of the ballistic missile submarine in Chinese strategy. During the Cold War, the ballistic missile submarine force was a critical part of overall Soviet naval strategy and Soviet national strategy. Can you provide a brief comment on how the SSBNs relate, and to include that, what is their relationship to the People's Liberation Army Rocket Force that was recently reborn, well, recently, last 10 years, from the old Second Artillery Corps, and how do they fit together? Especially given, as Chris noted, the rearming of the 6 GINs with the long-range JL3. So to either Chris or Andrew, if you want.
Well, the Chinese SSBNs up to now getting the JL3 were really regional players. The JL1, I'd like to almost say it was a technology demonstrator, but I get in trouble when I say that. That could have done something to Russia if it had to be. I'm not sure how well the missiles worked, but the JL2 definitely had a useful regional application. Andrew would probably can tell you better how that fits in organizationally. But when you get the JL3 on a quiet SSBN that can get into the far seas, now you got something that could be on par with the long-range ballistic missiles that the Strategic Rocket Force has.
Andrew, you want to field any of this?
Absolutely. So I think the larger picture that we're seeing here is one of China moving rapidly across the board. I think it's very hard to beat the options that the PLA rocket force has in China proper for terrain contour masking, plugging into fiber optic cable networks for comm security. Much harder to go to sea. Also very difficult to do the air leg of the triad, and yet they're moving in that direction as well. It's because they feel that Xi Jinping feels that China has the requisite overall resources, and he wants to prioritize directing them at having as comprehensive a set of capabilities for Taiwan scenarios in the relatively near future. And the message that he wants to send, first and foremost to Taiwan, second to the US, third to key US allies and some partners in the region, is basically resistance is futile, because at every rung of the escalation ladder, and even some rungs that others may not fully have, in every domain across the board, China has, if not dominance, at least a variety of good options. There is no way around this. That is the message he's trying to send. And he's willing to pursue very challenging programs and expend extreme amounts of resources to do so. I think by the 2030s, it'll be a very different ballgame for China, regardless of who is in power. But first, we have to run this very difficult gauntlet and in what I call the decade of maximum danger. It's a lot of things coming to a head at once, and it's a very difficult time. So regardless of the Type 094s, how good are they? What exactly is the range? What's the composite percentile of the JL3? This are they doing fully reliable heel toe operations, this, that, or the other? That's all extremely interesting, but the big picture that I see is it's a can do it all approach as part of a determined focus on Taiwan. And one way or another, I think she thinks that China is on track to get there. It's certainly shocking with each passing year to see how much more advanced hardware he has online, even though I think there are lingering organizational problems or challenges. We can see that by his continued reorganization, disbanding, for example, of the Strategic Support Force, uh, lingering personnel problems. I've discussed some of those, and lingering C5 ISRT problems that are obviously very related to his arsenal of A2AD weapons. I call this data fusion or confusion. I think that's the larger picture we're facing here.
Right. Thank you. I have a number of questions here. Some may be short in answering, but I'll wait toward the end and get the specific ones out. There's some big picture issues. One that's I'm going to stay with one relating more specifically to the operational, and that is, how well do you think the PLAN will do on maintenance and sustainment of the submarine force, particularly in relationship to their service life, depot maintenance, life cycle of maintenance availabilities? I think this would probably end up going to Chris to start. And okay, Andrew, thank you. And just to see whether or not, for example, can they sustain a prolonged conflict?
Well,
Maybe a
as
different
far-
question.
yeah, that's kind of a different one.
Yeah.
When you look at maintenance and sustainment, I think China has not yet been tested very hard on that yet. When I talked about the first 093B, a lot of organizations, to include the Department of Defense, said that the one in April was a 093B. I'm kind of pushing back against that, because that boat went from a launch dock to a pier and then promptly had most of the outer hull plating after the sail removed. The submarine then went over into a dry dock on the other side of Huludao, where it stayed for about a year. To me, that doesn't say new construction. It says major maintenance. And if you assume the service life of a 093, an early 93, is about 30 years, well, then the lead unit is at the midterm for maintenance. So I think they're starting to do that. I think they're starting to work in that. But I also think they're thinking ahead. if you look at the Huladao extension area, you've got that big submarine construction hall with 6 ways. And then there's one just a little bit to the south that has 4 ways. I'm leaning that that smaller building is like Zvezdochka in Russia at Severodvinsk. It's a maintenance first facility and then build if you've got space and time. But as a lot of these new boats come in, you're going to see them being pulled in for reactor recores, upgrades, and maintenance. And that's why I think that second building is there. It's a maintenance facility, in my opinion.
But that means that this is a slow learning process.
Yeah, because they've really not had to do it. I mean, they had the first 2 Hans didn't get upgraded.
Right.
I mean, they were terrible. The latter 3 have undergone updates to include anechoic coating, a 7-bladed screw, the ability to fire anti-ship cruise missiles. But we have not seen major repairs to those ships that often. And there's not a lot of them. So are we stressing the infrastructure? I don't think so. They're looking downrange to a time when their current infrastructure would be stressed without this new facility.
Okay. This is a question for Jonathan and for Andrew. Follows on both of what you've done. I'll let Andrew go first. Can you comment on your assessment of China's capability to A, fund a 2027 conflict, and B, provide the logistical and or military supply support to enable and sustain a kinetic conflict? Namely, so funding or provide the logistic and supply support to sustain a kinetic conflict.
Thank you. I tried to start answering this in the Q&A and provided a link that I hope those interested will click on. To my knowledge, it's the most comprehensive compilation of documents that elucidate what is Xi Jinping's centennial military building goal of 2027 and what does it mean. Broadly speaking, I think China has and is under Xi is stockpiling all the resources that it would need to attempt to be able to wage a conflict circa 2027. I don't think resources are the question for China. I don't think that's the rate limiter. I think that tends to be China's extreme strength. But I think it's a very different question of being able to sustain it over, well, sustaining, of course, becomes a question over time, regardless of even if one has an extreme amount of resources, given this, depending on the scenario. But what
Jonathan,
I think is a very different question is China's military operational capability in such a conflict. That's a very different question, much more difficult for China. Sorry.
Jonathan.
Right. So I think on one hand, they have the industrial base. That's their core advantage, I think, above all, is the industrial base that is certainly far larger than our own. But I think what they don't have is capital markets depth, and that's going to become a huge problem for them anyway. My view is widely known is that U.S. strategy towards China should involve, to the maximum extent that we can, cutting them off from capital markets access where U.S. allies and partners are still, between 60 and 70% of global equities and fixed income, whereas China runs about 14 to 20% at most, if you include Hong Kong. I mean, they already have debt issues, but their access to capital, which again, when we talk about these companies, when you're talking about something like CSSC, the entire banking system, where you have some of the largest banks in the world, I mean, that's really where the financing comes. I mean, the debt issuance and on these sorts of things that they can continually do and still basically have access to global markets. That I think is something that if we're willing to play real hardball with China, we start cutting that down now. However, if they initiate a conflict, I think what absolutely goes global immediately is the economic ramifications, where our companies in China would be gone, insofar as they exist there today and have not changed course. And then we would be playing a very tough global game with their companies worldwide. And I think at that point, what we've already seen in response to Putin's invasion of Ukraine, where pretty significant sanctions on some of their major banks, that would seriously impair China's ability to fund and capitalize a war effort. Whereas the industrial base, I think, is independent of that to a certain extent. But we still have a massive capital markets advantage that they won't have, particularly if we start playing a different game immediately.
Okay, thank you. Given the amount of time we have left, I'm going to take the one remaining very big question and throw this out. I'm going to give it first to Dan, given some of the things that he was talking about, but also to any other participant, because I think you'll all have a comment on this. What is the role of U.S. allies and partners in building maritime power? In particular, the ROK, Japan, and the EU exceed the PRC in shipbuilding capability. Should the U.S. rely more on their partners or on protectionist tariffs and U.S. only shipbuilding? And I know Dan may not want to go that far out. In fact, I'm not sure if Dan or Andrew want to go that far out as government employees about the last part about tariffs, but
I'm happy to talk about that.
Right. So
wait,
yeah.
let Dan go and then.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So I will lead the protectionist terrorists to those that can talk about the political ramifications. But I will say, undoubtedly, and if you saw in a recent press report that the Secretary Del Toro actually went to a Japanese shipyard, talked about, hey, doing additional repair work for U.S. ships and Japanese shipyards. So there was a definite opening, a definite desire to use that capacity, and I was remiss in not discussing the role of the Japanese. The Japanese are a critical ally in all of this. They have very capable diesel powered submarines and are very much an ally, and in fact they are an AUKUS partner in the Pillar 2 advanced capability piece, and we are working to bring them in more closely along those lines in the undersea and in other areas. So from that perspective, from the question, most undoubtedly, but it also goes back to something that Sarah Kirschberger that we quoted earlier is that the difference between civilian construction and military construction is very challenging. And just to put it in a finer point it is when the U.S. restarted our torpedo line in 2014, we put the money in to go in to build the torpedo in 2017. We got our first torpedoes, our first 2 torpedoes in 2022. It is easy to say that, hey, we're going to do that industry. It is, you cannot turn this on a dime. It is much, much harder than it sounds. And military build rate is a very challenging structure. And when in Canada's search for submarines, they're not going to the U.S. They're not going to France. My bet is they're going to go Japanese or South Korean. We will see, and that's where that comes in. I will turn the rest over to the team. Over.
Okay, Jonathan, go ahead. You've got about 2 minutes, given the time, but as much as you can.
Sure. I think really what you have to, again, we have a capital markets advantage that I think will allow us to engage with allies on the things we need if we're willing to do that. And if you were to put the right kinds of tariffs on China and on its specific companies, wherever they might operate or domicile, I think there's plenty of room on top of that for American industry to thrive. But I think you do need tariffs on a primary adversary that is using economic power to build military power. But I think you don't want to do that on allies in order to deepen the engagement. And if we can get that together, not only in this sector, but in a variety of others, I think you're able to start turning the tide against, China's market power in some of the key industries. So doing the right approach, but yes, engage the allies and disengage to the maximum extent possible with Chinese industry. On the other hand, there's also Japanese and Korean shipyards executing orders for Chinese shipping companies and vice versa, I think. So that's something where it might get a little more sensitive.
Andrew, 1 minute, if you've got anything. If not, I'll just move on to a question for you that was raised that's very specific, which was, how do you analyze, do you want to say anything on this one, Andrew, or can I throw this over?
Agree with both.
Okay.
We are running out of time.
Okay. Yeah. Last question. How do you analyze the meaning, this is for Andrew, the meaning of the promotion of a submariner to lead the People's Liberation Army Navy?
Well, CMSI has a what we call our note series on that, and I worked around the clock to with my our director Chris Sharman to turn that out within 36 hours. So I'll be happy to share the broader analysis. I think it's impossible to prove, but I think there are indications that uh, uh, Admiral Hu Zhongming's selection was in part a recognition of the need to prioritize the submarine force in this push for nuclear powered submarine development, which is important but also difficult. Can't afford to get it wrong, can't afford to have accidents. And uh, if it was thought that a submariner could bring something special and needed to the table there, then who was clearly the man for that role? A very distinguished career, having key experience both within the submarine force and across the Navy, and experience managing at the top levels of the Navy, and someone I think who can bring a key operational perspective in ways that will be useful to China's naval development. So I don't think it's purely a coincidence. It would be interesting to know more about who the other finalists were and what the decision-making calculus was, which I don't pretend to know. I will say that CMSI years ago was very interested when Admiral Zhang Dingfa, I believe, became the first submariner to be in charge of China's Navy, but tragically he succumbed to cancer shortly into his term. So this is really a first in terms of magnitude, and we believe likely longevity and impact in the position.
Thank you. We are out of time, although I have to admit I am very impressed and very thankful for all your great work and how you were able to get as much as you did into this 90 minutes. So I want to thank our panelists very much for their great work. I want to thank our audience for attending the 2024 Naval Submarine League History Seminar. I want to note that next spring marks the 125th anniversary of the United States Submarine Force, and we will be looking to put on a submarine history seminar at that time as well. And if you want to know more, please visit our website to learn more about what the Naval Submarine League does and how you can support our work. And I want to say again, thank you to all of you, and a good night.